people in the whole world. So I took out my pen on the page and I wrote this. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy doing it. Of the music. At the United Nations one day, the Nigerian ambassador said that Nigeria and South Africa will one day rule the black world forever. He said the whole black population will one day walk together as one, and then all black people everywhere will have to look to Nigeria and Mandela. So I wrote him a nice letter. I said, dear Mr. Nigeria, is either you and know your history or you don't see. Have you ever heard of Eric Williams, Harry Shaw and Grantley Adams, Marcus Garvey, Maurice Bishop, and Manley? These were great statesmen from the Caribbean whose ideas changed the world, my friend. So Africa ain't going nowhere, understand, without the Caribbean man. Mandela is true, he's a good fighter. He fought apartheid in South Africa. But when it comes to fighting, my friend, you can't forget Caribbean men and women. Daddy Sharp over in Jamaica, in Trinidad, Cuba, Uriah Butler, Bordeaux, Vincent, Croy, Barbados, Bossa, and Coffee down in Guyana. We too say the liberator, and our mothers look African food, changing up add spices to include to look tambron and Kaiser ball and cuckoo, acapone and saltfish stew. Caribbean mothers is pasta too, with ginger beer, sorrel and more peanuts blue. And our women know to take your hat and sweatband, boil it and tie down a man. So Africa ain't going nowhere, understand, without Caribbean woman. Alive. How could Mandela rule our world without our music, our soul? Is from reggae, belly and reggae, spoochka dance, soca and merengue. Our artists like Sparrow and Bob Marley, kitchen and short shirt, juke and gabi. And tell me which man in South Africa could bat like Brian Lara, not Trinidadian master. And our women are the mothers of great American sons and daughters, like LA's Bing Daimali and Harry Belafonte. Malcolm X, Jesse Moore, Malcolm X, Rodney Powell, the runner, all of these like Julian Jackson, the boxer, Abdul Karim and Patrick Ewing. In basketball, with Emil Griffith, they have stood tall. So Africa can rule Afro-Americans without the Caribbean. South Africa is really great, but to rule the Caribbean, they really late. For our mothers, they have given birth to some of the greatest men on earth. Derek Walcott, Nobel Peace Prize winner, David Césaire, Franz Fanon, the writer, Vincent Naipaul, who is known worldwide, and Sam Selvan, who recently died. We sing of them with pride. And our region is truly blessed with resources to stand the test. We are blessed with asphalt and oil and good soil. And when it comes to female beauty, Africa have nothing on me. For our fresh kingfish and dumpling, just plain with skin. And our elders teach their kids to use lemongrass to show the worms where to pass. So Africa can rule motherland without Caribbean woman. God bless you. God bless you. Honest Liverpool, Chocolate.
And a very good evening to you. Coming in there with the mighty Choctaws making the linkage between the Caribbean and Africa. Good evening. We continue to cover Black identity here tonight as we continue to press for the removal of that word Negro from official usage in Guyana. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Politics 101. Politics 101. We expect some guests here tonight, and we're going to be continuing that conversation. So stay tuned, share the link. We're going to get going in a minute or so.
Them fellas, a beautiful round of applause. Nice to see you, Wellington. Beautiful. And while we thank God for Thanksgiving Day, we have to thank God for being us Africans. So I want to thank God for making me black. And I welcome this song to you. I hope you love it. It's called They Ain't See Africa at All. Music. I see black people running from their race. Their own black children they can't face. They don't know their roots as a glorious bloom. Blessed be the fruits of their womb. They just be acting as though they shame of their history. They just be proud of other people's own. They just be glad to disclose their baby's ancestry, putting their child upon a false throne, not their own. For hear them boast to their friends and their neighbor, my baby's nose from his Spanish grandfather. My grandmother married a Chinese now. That is why the eye's so pretty, and he has such thick eyebrows. The dimple come from a husband's side, whose great grandfather was Irish. And watch how the eyes pretty and wide, cause my mother mixed with British. And watch at me, I'm Caribbean Portuguese, so me child curly. But the baby black down to the eyeball, they see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. I said the baby black like a voodoo doll, they see Africa at all. I see black people running from their race. Food from our table, they can't face. If you hear them boast about how they just make French fry and French toast with that steak, they have a name for all them foreign foods they're using. Italian pizza, they murdering. Big African wedding, they serving Spanish rice with Scotch whiskey and French wine on ice to feel nice. Chinese chowing, serving in black christening. English muffin, when there's some graduating. They just fry egg and call that Spanish omelette, and frying Irish potato with New Zealand butter instead. Hungarian goulash and Irish stew is what they're preparing for lunch. They even go in Honolulu to drink up the Hawaiian punch. Yet when they brew, there will be Anton Cuckoo and Swizzle Callaloo. Or make their bone and tambourine ball. They don't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. They making jam and jashi look small. They don't see Africa at all. Oh, 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 oh. Black people must stop running from their race and search this their place for their traits. You don't have to go by plane to Ghana in order to see Africa. Every time you're palm planting with mortar and pestle, or on your hand you wear your slave band, or when the Moko Jambi walk tall amidst the people, then you rubbing shoulders with Africans. Understand what the neighbors say, how she neighbor stringberry in New York City, so that makes her a Yankee. Oh, how she love stories of Arabian Nights
and boasting about her French perfume and her Turkish delights. African dashiki she won't wear, she would not even plait her hair. Stories of the Lagahoo, her children them never hear. Yet when her husband, Mr. Paul, left her last year, she run quickly for Obia. She burning light to put blight on Paul. She ain't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. The Obia man gave she push back to bring back Paul. She ain't see Africa at all. The Hawaiian punch, yet when they brew, there more be and turn cuckoo and swizzle callaloo. Or make their porn and tambran ball. They don't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. They making jam and jashi look small. They don't see Africa at all. Oh, 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 oh. Black people must stop running from their race and search this their place for their traits. You don't have to go by plane to Ghana in order to see Africa. Every time you're palm planting with mortar and pestle, or on your hand you wear your slave band, or when the Moko Jambi walk tall amidst the people, then you rubbing shoulders with Africans. Understand what the neighbors say? How she neighbor string berry in New York City, so that makes her a Yankee. Oh, how she love stories of Arabian Nights and boasting about her French perfume and her Turkish delights. African dashiki she won't wear, she would not even plait her hair. Stories of the Lagahoo, her children them never hear. Yet when her husband, Mr. Paul, left her last year, she run quickly for Obia. She burning light to put blight on Paul. She ain't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. The Obia man gave she push back to bring back Paul. She ain't see Africa at all.
Oh yes, then see Africa at all. Then see, well, we gonna make them see Africa. We gonna make them see Africa. We are on a mission. We are on a mission. We are on a mission. Good evening to all of you. Welcome to Politics 101. We continue to banish that word. We continue to banish that word. Negro. Negro. We are on a mission. Negro must go. Negro must go. Negro must go. Good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining us, some beautiful African people, and those of you who are not phenotypically African or culturally African, You are friends of Africans. Welcome to this program. You are part of the family. You are part of the family. You are part of the family. Good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Whether you're joining us from Linden, or you're joining us from West Belize, welcome to Politics 101. It's Thursday evening. Vincent Alexander is here to help us with that conversation on African identity.
Quote, unquote, is French,
African
Spanish,
identity.
Dutch, Portuguese, as well as English.
African identity.
And because of this, we have a proper town, quote unquote, is French, Spanish, Dutch,
We're talking
Portuguese,
tonight.
as well as English.
We're talking tonight about
historian
Africa.
Noted both the importance of African Liberation Day in terms of our African identity and some of the root causes for our problem of identification.
I have met brothers and sisters who say that their mother tongue, quote unquote, is French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, as well as English, which we speak. And because of this, we have a problem of identification. We do not know whom we are. And that is why this gathering is of great symbolic importance, because it is an act of identification. We are saying that we identify with the African people of the African. We are that we are an African people. When we make this identification, have no illusions about the fact that this is a very revolutionary initiative. It is a rejection of every other form of identification which the white society has asked us to accept. Let me draw your attention to something which white universities and white libraries practice. And this is a university community. Numerous universities lie around this land. Go into their libraries and check the Library of Congress card. Under Europe or European, you will find all entries listed concerning the continent of Europe. You will also find entries listed about Europeans in East Africa, Europeans in North Africa, Europeans in Asia and Australia. Look under the Chinese, you will find entries listed not only for mainland China, but for Malaysia and for the Chinese in North America. But look on the Africa and the Africans, the only entries on the Africans relate to the continent itself. There are no entries on the Africans overseas. There is no such category. Africans who have been raped from the continent mysteriously disappear and become Negro.
Mysteriously disappear and become Negro. Become Negro. Become Negro. No more Negro. No more Negro. The voice and the image there of the late, indomitable Dr. Walter Rodney. Thank God for Rodney. Thank God for Guyana. Thank God for Burnham. Thank God for Ivan Van Sertima, that we have made our contributions to the Black world, and we have helped our Guyanese to recognize their African identity. Good evening to all of you. Yes, Stephen is joining us from Firish Village. I have fond memories of Firish Village. I had some good times there when I was a young man, dancing kwekwe, and really seeing Africa. Struggle say you don't have to fly on a plane to go to Ghana to see Africa. When you go to Firish and you go to Belladrum and El Dorado and Hope Tongue and Seafield and Buxton and then Amstel and Ithaca and Golden Grove and Anns Grove. When you go to the Queenstown on the Essequibo coast, you see Africa. But we Black people sometimes play the fool. we play the fool. And that is why that man could say, all you been using Negro for 180 years, we're wrong now. The ice pass we, but part of the ice pass is because we allow it, because we don't call ourselves African. We run from black, we run from race. Oh, we are all Guyanese. Of course, we are all Guyanese. Of course, we are all Guyanese. I'm not giving up Guyana to anybody, but I'm also African, African. And nobody's going to shout Africa if you Africans don't do it. We are on a mission. Good evening, Vincent.
Good evening, David. And good evening to your viewers.
Vincent, when you heard the news that Nigel Hughes refused to allow his client Kedaki Amsterdam to answer to the term Negro, what ran through your mind?
Well, what ran through my mind was a moment that I savored, because it meant that he was demonstrating the kind of consciousness required of us, particularly in this decade, where issues like those have been identified as issues that have to be targeted and dealt with. So Nigel was truly being a Pan-Africanist, a person of African descent who recognized that we are in a moment and in a movement to deal with issues which have affected us over the years, issues which are a hangover from the pre-independence period, the post-emancipation period. So certainly demonstrated that he was in the current struggle for our recognition as the decade has provided for us to be in.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And I'm going to come back to you with that decade, because I think the decade was justified by that moment. Good evening to all of you. I love you all, because you're all very bright. A man said, Don said, Dr. Hines, in highlighting master teachers, you didn't mention George G.M. James. My humblest apologies. George James, certainly one of our master teachers. And I want also to add Rusty Mackinnon, who was from my village, Buxton, left and went away to the United States, then he went to England. And he was the money man for the Pan-Africanist movement. So I will forget sometimes, but I know that my audience here is going to pull me up when I fall short. Thank you very much, Don. Certainly, George G.M. James is one of our master teachers. Good evening to all of you. We are joined by Tacuma Ogunseye. Eventually, Tacuma, I'm going to put the same question to you, and hope you don't stop me, because you don't put things to people. You had a man named Sanko, from Buxton. He was a scared man, and he get charged for parking he scared some way wrong, and he got to court, and the magistrate asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "I'm Dudu Sanko, deal with two Doko." Said, "What's your profession?" He said, "I'm a mule chauffeur." When they come to the cross-examine, the liar cross-examine, he said, "I'm putting it to you, Mr. Sanko, that you break the law." He said, "You can't put them to me, you've not been there." So I'm being very careful when I'm putting this question to you. When you heard Nigel Hughes told the police that his client Kedaki Amsterdam is not going to answer to the term Negro, what were your immediate thoughts?
Good night, Dr. Hines and viewers. I want to join with Vincent to say that the fact that we are in the decade for African people, what the United Nations have designated, I think probably played a major role because it keeps all of us conscious on the issues of African people sharp, and I will want to feel that okay, that was one of the influences on the mind of Comrade Nigel. When I heard the thing, it took me right back to my days in Askria, when we used to debate those issues, and we have long banished that word, Negro, and we have, in promotion of the Cultural Revolution, have promoted the use of African, and the whole question of African dignity was put on the agenda and became a very powerful social force. And it drew my mind right back to that point. And then, you right away, you reflect without knowing. I said to myself, those policemen will be Africans. And the fact that they themselves couldn't recognize that they're using a term that ought not to be used in this period of African liberation and the struggle for African dignity was in a way an indictment to them, but in a way I also felt an indictment to us, that probably we haven't been doing enough at the cultural level, to promote among our people the necessary cultural reflexes to deal and to push back against these matters. If my memory holds, I remember in the early days of AGDA, we did had a campaign against that word, the use of that word by the police. And I remember that to some extent the police had walked back on the use of the word. But with these things, I didn't think at the time we got it off the law books. And they just creep back into the police behavior. I think Nigel, by raising it, give us an opportunity once and for all to use this period and this incident to get that word strike off the books of the country when it relates to national issues and national institutions. So we are at present in have to support and compliment Brother Nigel for his sharpness on this matter, and we have to ensure collectively that this time we get it struck off the books.
Thank you very much, Tacuma. And you introduced where I wanted to go, because I'm glad I have Vincent, Alexander, and yourself on here tonight, because I'm going to ask you all this question, but I want to preface it by saying this. Professor Desprez wrote a book on race and ethnicity in Guyana. And he said when he came to do his research in the late 50s and the early 60s, he was struck that when he went into African villages, they were using the term African. They weren't using Negro, they weren't using colored. And this is the late 50s. Another professor who studied ethnicity in Guyana from Fiji, he was struck that the word Africa appeared in Askria twice, African Society for Cultural Relations with Independent Africa. So it says that Black people in Guyana had long turned their backs on the use of the term Negro. And I'm going further. When the Black Power Revolution occurred in Trinidad in 1970, February of 1970, where the Black Power activists rose up against the Trinidad government led by Eric Williams, who is and was an icon because of his book, Capitalism and Slavery, which is still a text that once you study anything Africa, you have to read. They rose up against him because they said that we had gotten independence, that he, Williams, had mobilized and socialized them as Africans, but Black people still couldn't work in banks in Trinidad. Black people still couldn't live certain places in Trinidad. And they rose up. And when journalists asked Iyusi Kwayana about Guyana, Kwayana answered to words to the effect to say that in Guyana, the Forbes Burnham government of that time had gone further than Trinidad. Black people were working in banks by the turn of the 1970s. I give that preface to ask both of you this question. Black Guyanese have stopped using the word Negro. Burnham government had gone further than other governments in the region in terms of recognizing Black people. In Jamaica, they had to wait until Manley came to power in 1972 for the Rastafarians to get some recognition. Why, given all of that, why did the term Negro still remained on the police books? Clearly, we were ahead of the rest of the Caribbean on matters of Black identity and Black power. Why Vincent and Tacuma? And I'm glad I have, because Vincent is a PNC man. Tacuma is an Askria, Kwayana, WPA man. Why, despite this progressive politics that Kwayana talked about and that these professors recognized when they came here in the 50s and the 60s, why Negro is still being used today by the police? Vincent, you'll go first.
I would say in the first instance that the people themselves were in some regards ahead of the leaders. In some regards, the people were ahead of the leaders. And that among the people, there was that kind of consciousness that led them to understand that they should have self-respect. And in so doing, they should be able to have an identity that was the identity of liberation and the identity of freedom, as opposed to an identity of oppression. So I think the people were a bit ahead of the leaders. But I would also say that one of the problems we were faced with is that we were caught up dealing with this whole question of quote unquote nation building. Mm-hmm. And in many regards, avoiding issues that seem to be ethnic or race-based issues in our attempt to forge this thing called one Guyana.
Yes.
Called one Guyana. And so it is not a case that the leadership may not have been conscious, but may in fact have been cautious, given the political landscape that was ethnically charged, and trying to avoid on what they may have considered unnecessary skirmishes in their attempt to forge a country under a motto, one people, one nation, one destiny. You know, I've often said to people that when we talk about one people, one nation, one destiny, it could only be aspirational. We have not, had not and have not reached the stage of one people, one nation, one destiny. And the chances are, you know, that we will never be one people. We may well continue to be diverse people.
We have lost your song there, Vincent. Yes, go ahead. We are hearing you now.
Nation state.
We seem to be having some challenges there with Vincent.
one.
This song.
I think in some regards, we have ourselves to introspect and to understand that where we were at and what we did was where we at
We seem to be
where we were at and what we did, and our endeavor to achieve something without the understanding that that could not have been achieved if we had not dealt with the parts. We're trying to deal with the whole and not paying attention to the parts which made up the whole, which, if not dealt with, could not lead to the rectification or the development of the whole. So I think on one hand, we had the kind of consciousness required, but on the other hand, we were being, what in Gary may be considered to be politically correct in an attempt to forge someone which we felt may have been affected, seemed to be biased in terms of things relating to one ethnicity. I would go on to say that my own view about Burnham in this regard was that he was conscious. He sought to do things, but he sought to be cautious and not apparently offensive. And that was indeed, in many regards, an error. It was a strategic error in his pursuit of one people, one nation, one destiny.
One person who I know very well would not have even used the word Negro or thought of the word Negro is in the audience tonight. Kwesi Ojinga, my brother from BV and Buxton, well known in the theater world, changed his name to Kwesi Ojinga. He was part of a legion of young black men and women of that period, Tacuma, Ogunseye. I would like you to come in and comment on that question. Your elder, your organization launched the Cultural Revolution, did some remarkable things, connected the Guyana with Africa, introduced the naming of black people children, giving them African names. Yet, Negro remained in use by the police to this day. What went wrong?
I can't say with any great conviction that I really could answer the question, but I would attempt to try to see, what, to my mind, were responsible. What were the things that were responsible? I don't think it may be one simple thing. And remember, we are looking at a period. Let us see. I mean, the question of Negro was raised even before Ascrio historically. But let us start with the 60s when Ascrio raised it to the present. Is a lot of time. And when we launched the Cultural Revolution, it had the support of Burnham and the PNC. So at least in the early period of the Cultural Revolution, I couldn't see any, political reason why, that could not have happened. I would say that by the time the Burnham and Ascria fell out, and we are fighting each other, I think I want to see that Burnham began to back off on some of the objectives of the Cultural Revolution, because
why didn't Ascria and subsequently WPA continue to raise that? They raised other things. They talked about dictatorship and other things. Why did they not press for the removal of the word Negro? So Burnham may have backed off. Did Ascria and the WPA back off from these cultural things? That is what I want to get from you.
Okay, I will try to answer that very quickly because to me that's probably the easier part to answer.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get at is that once the differences became a serious political matter, okay, I think and the state, those who control the state begin to back off because they begin to tie cultural success of Askria as, in some ways is at the expense of the PNC. I think that the elements in the state, for instance, a matter like that would have fallen under the Ministry of Culture, who should probably be the person or the institution in the government to look at those findings and bring legislation, and to keep it in the forefront of the government. But I think in that political atmosphere, I guess even one of the bravest ministers of culture would have been a little cautious. Now, in terms of ASCRI and the WP, I think that what happened, like, all of us are guilty of it. I think the strength of the colonization process on our consciousness, okay, is something you have to fight on a daily basis. And it is easy for individuals and even organizations, okay, to reach a point, not necessarily deliberately, but unconsciously, where certain issues, like the use of the term Negro, and to continue a fight for it, okay, fall off, slip out through the lens. And I think that is what would explain, because I don't know that anybody in the WP or anybody in ASCRI would have any problem with that. But I think people consciously, came to the judgment that, look, if you and the government are at odds, the chances are they're doing certain things are less likely. And I think people then tends to concentrate the energies, in other areas. And that is my humble explanation. But I think the fundamental thing to me is the persuasiveness, okay, of the still dominant colonial European culture in our midst that really saturate our consciousness, and we have to fight on a daily basis, okay, to suppress it. And in the process, we just, certain things just slip through.
Just slip through. And Vincent makes the point, which I subscribe to, that Burnham and the government had to be cautious. They were let me take back had to be. They were cautious because in trying to build this thing, one people, one nation, you don't want to concentrate. They didn't concentrate on any specific ethnic, especially their group, because they would have been charged with being racist and so on and so forth. And in the WPA, I am arguing that in the WPA's pursuit of the same multiracial politics, which it became known for in the century, it dropped the ball on identity politics, meaning African politics. And Ogun, you would know that the late Andaye, myself and yourself, began to raise that question about whether it was a mistake by the WPA to, in a sense, close down ASCRIA. And we have concluded that it was a mistake, that in pursuit of our multiracialism, socialism story, we dropped the ethnic ball because it would have interfered with the multiracialism. In a sense, committing the same sin that the PNC committed. Ogunseye, I'm still pressing you on that.
No, I agree with you in terms of the African question.
Yes.
But I think the question of the word, use of the word Negro, to me, it's...
No. I'm not. I'm saying the use of the word Negro is a casualty of our pursuit of multiracialism. And we made the same mistake that the PNC made, They call it one people, one nation, one destiny. We call it multiracialism. Both of us dropped the ball when it came to identity politics. Let's move on. Let's move on to Vincent. What I was there when Nigel raised that point at the police station, and all kinds of emotions went through my mind. And one thing that became clear was that the UN has got it right. Because the UN did say in the rationale for the International Decade for the People of African Descent, it said states pass laws making black people equal, etc., etc. But there are some things that still have to be done, and that they challenge the states to deal with the question of structural and institutional racism, which are still being felt by African people. And I think this term Negro is being used by an institution called the police force, which is the coercive arm of the state. And that it is one of the things that the state didn't deal with. And I think all of us agreed with that. And something like this, I think, is one of the things that the state can do immediately to satisfy the mandate of the United Nations. Your thoughts, and then Ogunseye.
All right, before I get to that, just let me go back a bit. It is apparent that in our documentation we continue to use the word Negro. But I don't think that this word was silhouetted. In other words, though it was used officially, I don't think across the mass that we were using that word. And so the mass has gotten to a point of consciousness where what was happening officially was not silhouetted and therefore not necessarily drawing the kind of attention that we saw recently. And that in the context of the kind of politics being pursued, then that was not seen to be a matter on the front burner, so to speak. And it provided some comfort for our politicians not to have to deal with issues like those, because it avoided them being accused of pursuing ethnic and racial politics. And I say that because, for example, in the People's National Congress we formed, under the leadership of Desmond Hoyt, I raised the question of what I call ethnic politics. And when I raised that question, a party that sought to project itself as a national party, there were Indians in the party who accused me of being racist for raising that question. So you see what was the jeopardy of confronting something which seemed to be, in some regards, under the radar, and therefore you could not deal with it and get on with your business. And if you were to deal with it, then you would create some difficulties in terms of your portrayal of being a party that is all Guyanese, or a portrayal of looking after African interests as opposed to other interests. So I think that landscape and the political environment at the time aided and abetted that cautious approach to questions like these. But for me, it is not merely questions, it's not merely the question of Negro. I think you got it quite right when you talked about institutional and other arrangements. What the decade specified was that there were remnants, institutional and legal remnants, that were associated with racism, discrimination, xenophobia, etc. and that this decade should be used to address those matters. And they said in uncertain terms that there is a need for the change in institutional and legal frameworks. When they talked about institutional framework, there are two aspects to that. An institution may be an organization and the manner of its operations, what purpose it serves, what it does, etc. And that question is pertinent to the institution called the police force. What purpose it serves? Because we know that initially the police force was established specifically to oppress the people of African descent after emancipation, with the introduction of crimes like vagrancy and so on. We know that. So that is what should be dealt with, institutions that are established that were anti-liberation of the people of African descent. But institutions also mean not only an organization, but when you talk about institution, you're also talking about a practice. I don't think it resonates easily with the ordinary people when you use this word institution. What you're really saying, they probably would see an organization, but they wouldn't necessarily see a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And the use of the word Negro is, to a large extent, more of a practice, though official, than anything else. And that is exactly what the United Nations was speaking to. Organizations that were inimical to the people of African descent, and the practices inimical to the people of African descent. Because the practice of calling people of African descent Negro has connotations that are related to their identity, who they are. The word Negro, has a lot to do with the word black in the context of black meaning something that's inferior, something that's evil, a lot of negative connotations. So even as we moved to use the word Negro, it brought negative connotations with it, and therefore identified people of African descent in a particular way. When you refer to Negro, there was a lot of baggage associated with that. And so therein stands the whole question of being discriminatory against these people, being racist, seeing them as less than others. And the UN was pretty clear that these were the issues we had to deal with. And the UN came to that coming out of the Durban Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Let's understand that people of African descent and Africans themselves were integral to this struggle, and in fact, the backbone of the struggle. So don't just we have to appreciate that the UN came around to it. I think we have to be clear in our minds that it's our own consciousness and our own struggle that brought the UN to where it came to. And the difficulty we're faced with is that governments, some states, though they signed on to this declaration, have not themselves come to the understanding of what they have signed on to, and or do not give that interpretation because of their own understanding of things and life. And so we have a situation in Guyana where there's a continuous denial that there's no need for special attention to the people of African descent. And we seem to focus on the economics in that regard, when in fact the United Nations did not restrict us to the economics. They talked about recognition, justice, and development. Bearing in mind the three are interrelated. So if you don't deal with one, it will impact also the state of the other. But the question of Negro is more related directly to the issue of recognition, seeing people for who they actually are, as opposed to seeing them for who they're not, and for whom you would wish them to be in the context of a racist outlook. And so we ourselves need to come to the understanding that what Nigeria did is a moment in a wider struggle to deal with institutions and institutional practices that are inimical to the interests of the people of African descent. And therefore, as we go ahead to ensure that Negro is completely erased as a practice, we have to understand that this is the moment when we have to get the government to understand that this decade is not about a handout of cash to anybody. It's not about saying that people can go and get the same contracts. It's about understanding that we have to deal with recognition, and that recognition has a lot to do with people's identity, how you see them, how you treat them, and that in the context of the state, that can be institutionalized in organizations, their procedures, their processes, and their practices. And that it's those things that we've got to address, even if we say people have equal economic opportunity. Because in the arena of economic opportunity, if we perpetuate a view of people, particular view of people, then that view will even influence how they have access to the economic opportunity. So you say black man can't do business. Negro can't do business. Not one of his qualities. So though he is, in a sense, legally entitled to do business, there's an attitude which says he can't do business because he's a Negro. And so those things, those languages, which project and portray us in a particular way, and which cause us to be treated in a particular way, have to be dealt with. And the wider question of how we review all of our institutions, their framework, how we review all of our laws, becomes very, very pertinent if we are going to address the question of the recognition of the people of African descent. And the state has got to come around to accepting that those issues are extant. There are laws in the book, and you refer to one in a previous program in front of Magistrate Chintel.
Yes.
You referenced the one. The laws are there. Sometimes they are comatose, they're silent, they're not, but they can be at any moment brought to life. And therefore, as we seek under this decade to ensure that the question of recognition is addressed and its relatedness to justice and development, we have to look at our institutions. We have to ensure that those institutional arrangements and institutional practices that are detrimental to the people of African descent are addressed and redressed.
And Vincent, of course, is referring to a charge that I was charged in 1983 with damaging a tomato, and was hauled before the court. Luckily, the magistrate Chinta, she was an Indian national, and that was itself instructive. She was incensed that the police would even charge me with a law. Well, first of all, that the law was still on our books, and that the police would charge somebody in 1983 with damaging a tomato, because clearly it was a slave law, and it's still there on the books. And it points to the kind of work that we have to do. Tacuma, the International Decade of the People of African Descent, and its relationship to things like getting rid of the use of the word Negro. And if you want to, you can go back to the question, because I think Vincent is being very frank here. He said he raised it in the PNC, and the Indians in the PNC called him a racist. Did you have any such experience in the WPA? Because both parties were doing the same thing. You call it multiracialism. The government, the PNC government, call it nation building, one people, one nation, one destiny. Same thing. And the experience of trying to do identity issues within that context, I can tell you, I know that from experience. It's quite a piece of work, but you can address that if you want to, Tacuma.
No, I can't think about no experience within the WPA that is similar to what Vincent point to, because the WPA started, very differently. ASCREA was the African organization, IPRA, the Indian organization, and the ethnic conversation, the ethnic issues were very foremost. In fact, we put it in the country, okay, but then then the political struggle take a turn that forced us away from certain kinds of discussions, which, in the absence of that political emergency, we would have had, and that in itself, postpone some of those low-lying fruits, So I would say the WPA had a different history.
But I'll press
you see, I don't believe,
because currently the WPA is being accused of being a black party for engaging African issues, and are there difficulties internally with that? I mean, let's be frank.
Yeah, but the difficulties on that is more political. And I don't want to spend a lot of the time on dealing with the political, but it's more, is more political, because, there's a great sense in the WP of a political urgency in the country that we need to address and to address, get these matters, resolved as quickly as possible. And that urgency does put its own kinds of pressure, both on the internal structures of the party and so forth and so forth. But I think that is another program.
But we just wanted to perhaps highlight to our viewers the difficulty in a multi-ethnic society when you're trying to build multi-ethnic organizations of dealing with ethnic issues. I think that's the big question. Vincent is saying
yes, that is true for the society.
I mean,
but I don't think it is true. I don't think it is true for the WPA. You see, there's where I'm struggling. It's not true for the WPA acting as a party. It is difficult for the WPA acting in the context of this society and trying to implement multiracial politics and multiracial understanding in a very polarized situation. So to me, it's two different things. The party is very comfortable in dealing with all of these matters.
No, I think
as a party internally, but to apply that to the country, is a different story. It's a different story.
All organizations that call themselves multiracial have problems when it comes to dealing with issues of a particular ethnic group. And I think our WPA is no different. We may be, it may not be as intense as in other organizations because we are a relatively small party, but it's an issue in our party. And I think we should be frank about it. We are struggling through it as we must, but it is a problem. It is a problem in trying to build a multiracial society, multiracial organization, while at the same time dealing with specific issues. I am critical of this program of the PNC leadership right now because I think they just lump all the ethnic issues together. All of us are suffering when it is not true that all of us are suffering the same way. Amerindian people have certain problems that are particular to Amerindian people. East Indian people have some problems that are particular to them. Africans got problems that are particular, like Negro. and multiracialism, as you strive for a multiracial organization, a multiracial society, the space to deal with those things separate is very small. And that's our dilemma. And all parties, all organizations in the country, I think, have to face it. But let's move on. Tomorrow, yes.
Just let me say, in that context, the issue is striving for multiracial votes.
Yes.
I don't know that we really properly strive for multiracial organizations. I think the striving is for multiracial votes.
But you see, the WPA is in a different position. The WPA have never become a total electoral party, and votes, multiracial votes, is never a big issue for us because we believe in power sharing as an important solution to the problem. So you don't have, if you believe in constitutional power sharing at the executive level, then you don't have to fight for multiracial votes. So the WPA, even though it was a multiracial party, once we embrace that, we don't feel that we're under the same pressure as a party who wants to win power in its own and to keep and to deal with the winner-take-all system. They are under more pressure, to get crossover votes. But given our fundamental philosophical position from the time we became a party, we have seen this. We have said that the solution to the Guyana problem lies in power sharing between the two major parties, and by extension, the two major race groups. And in that sense, the WPA is really, in a way, free from a big struggle for crossover votes. We have to struggle once we accept electoral politics to get votes to become relevant. And we have failed to get that because we have never got more than 2% of the vote. So the country, in terms of electoral politics, make we irrelevant.
Right.
But we have been fighting to be relevant in politics. In politics, this is more general and it's beyond party politics. And I think there we're doing better than we have ever done in electoral politics.
Tomorrow at 5 o'clock at Crystal Labor College, there'll be a symposium on this issue. Vincent, you can help me out here. I know Nigel Hughes is one of the speakers. Don Cush is one of the speakers. Olive Sampson, and help me, I think there are 2 or 3 other speakers, Vincent.
Winston Felix.
Winston Felix, yes, is going to be one.
To be a speaker as well.
Right.
And there's some changes occurring because of availability.
Right.
So I wouldn't go to the other names now, but definitely Don, Winston, yourself.
Yes. I'll be on the panel too. Yes.
And Nigel Hughes are going to be on the panel.
Yes, and later on in the evening, once that program is finished there, on this Politics 101, we will continue the conversation. We have Kimani Nehusi, who is an expert, a scholar who deals with the issue of African identity. He will be on. Eric Phillips, we all know Eric on African issues. He will be on. And the third part, Don Cush. Don is on both panels, so she will be on. So we'll continue the conversation here tomorrow night. And we'll also have Dr. Vincent Adams, who is our in-house Friday night person. So we have a big panel tomorrow night on Politics 101. Vincent, Tacuma, the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think we can afford to push it back in. The society has to grapple with it. The Attorney General started off by poo-pooing it. It's been used for it. He has since walked back and said that he's for removing the use of the word and so on and so forth. Where do we go from here? We are organizing. We are holding symposia, fora, panel discussions. Where do we go from here? And are there other similar issues, Vincent, that we have to deal with given the opening that there is now?
First of all, I think that from what is being said on Rebound by Nandalal and what Jagdio said today suggests that they are prepared to act. Why? It's another question. I don't know that preparedness is a commitment and an acceptance of the real problem, but they're prepared to act on this particular one. But I think it's important that we understand that all Nigeria has done is to push a button, and that this issue of Negro is about one of many institutional practices, in addition to legal arrangements and institutions that exist that ought to be addressed if we are to pursue the goals of the decade. I want to take this opportunity to give another example, which has, in some regard, been addressed, but not because of the people of African descent. We've inherited mechanisms for getting names. We're not talking about the names we get, which are also inherited. So that's a practice of using British names. But we've inherited the mechanism that your name is associated with your father's name. So automatically, if your father is on your registration, birth, your surname is your father's surname. That's automatic. So that's institutional arrangement. In the Indo-Guyanese community, very often where there is no father and only the mother's name is there, an Indian male ends up with a female name because of the arrangements for how we give names. And so you would find in the Indo-Guyanese community, and also beyond that community, that they tend to have call names that are unrelated to their birth certificates, because those are the names they're comfortable with. And they live their whole life with these call names, the school system, the hospital, etc. But GCOM, as of 2008, started this process of saying, look, we are only going to register you with your birth certificate. And so people are now getting ID cards in names that don't represent their call names. And there's a lot of protests and a lot of confusion because of that. I don't think the nation is aware that the government has changed the law on how you get the name. And that you can now walk into the register of births and deaths and say, look, I want to change my name, and this is the name I want to use. And so, in fact, the question, the issue of a discriminatory practice in terms of how Indians got their names has been addressed. Incidentally, there's a tangential benefit if the African Guyanese are conscious that this is happening, because it means you no longer have to go to the court if you want to change your name that was given at birth. You can now simply go to the register of births and deaths and change your name. So you see the tangential benefit we have, but it is based on addressing illegal and institutional remnant that's come over from
I think we might be having some difficulty there with Vincent. Okay, here we go.
kinds of issues that ought to be addressed. And at the bottom line of these issues that ought to be addressed is the question of collecting data based on ethnicity so that our policies could be responsive to the various ethnic groups. The data will tell us where the ethnic groups are positioned in relation to issues and what we can then address the issues from an ethnic perspective. And I think that is the bottom line in terms of the institutional arrangements that we have got to address. There are many other institutional arrangements in the health system. We particularize the problems that are faced by people of African descent and people of Indian descent, and therefore have health policies and allocation of resources in response to those peculiarities. So we have a very fundamental issue in this country. And the decade provides an opportunity from the standpoint of the people of African descent for those issues to be addressed from an institutional and legal perspective.
Alexander, Tacuma, Ogunseye, where do we go from here?
I think we have to recognize that changes in these institutional on these institutional questions in many cases require two things: advocacy on the behalf of the general masses or sections of the masses interest groups, and the willingness of the government to act. I think those are the two critical things. And I'm being honest, I don't believe that if Burnham was faced with an active request to change Negro, write Negro off the books, that Burnham would have any problem. It slipped through the Burnham regime, I think, basically because of failure of activism in that direct in the way. I think the same thing is true for a Jagan government. I think the same thing is true even for Granger government. What we gonna know now is whether you could say the same thing about the Jagdeo government, because they have a chance now. Because to me, in the scheme of things, this is a low-lying fruit, and I have my own view about them. But I always give space for human weakness. The error is human, and all of us, whether we call ourselves president, politician, scientist, all of us, okay, some way or the other, come down with making mistakes. Now, what struck me with Nandalal is not his initial response, because I know that Nandalal and them in come to no struggle. I don't think they have any significant education about Guyanese history and African history and so forth. Therefore, I will expect, okay, if Nandalal did what he did, okay, I would say in a big way is ignorance and arrogance, because the arrogance is tied to the present political posture. But I want to separate the political posture. Okay, so I think that Nandalal could be excused with initial response, but having made the response, and then you get the reaction, and rather than doing the decent thing to concede that you make a mistake, okay, and step back, you seek, okay, to change your position, but do it in a way to suggest that people were, distorting what you said, when the evidence is clear for everybody to see. It is that mindset that worries me. With this crop of political leaders we have, I give way for political mistakes, but I find it hard to believe, that the level of consistency that you see from the PPP leadership at the highest level, including Jagdeo and all of them, the propensity to lie and to engage in barefaced lies is a worrying thing. It's a worrying thing. And I'm saying that if Nandalal wants to be true to himself, he should use his position in the PPP and his position as AG to fast track legislation they will know what they got to do to get it off the books. I never work in the bureaucracy, and I ain't got no great sense of how these things do. But I think that he, as Attorney General, okay, and the Minister of Home Affairs, working with the police, you know, I don't think it's not a police matter. It is not a police matter, even though it is a clear relics of the colonial past, which we could expunge from our records and our books without any headache. Once there is the political will, it only becomes problematic when it is linked. Doing so is linked to some political program. There's where it becomes problematic, and I want to give the PAP the benefit of the doubt on this matter. And I want to see whether or not they will quickly move to struck this obnoxious word of the books of Guyana. They have a good opportunity to do that and to prove me wrong. You know, so that is my approach to the matter in terms of Nandalala and the government. Now, I think that these colonial structures, because, you know, the political revolution in Guyana, the Caribbean, have lagged behind the cultural revolution. And why the cultural revolution advocate and promote advocacy, implementation requires the politicians. Because the political revolution was slow, and the cultural revolution, a lot of those offending practices remain. And I think, because you see, I am convinced that the final liberation of Africa, our dignity, our economic, our political standing in the country and the world, will only be completed and to make significant progress when the African people themselves engage in a political liberation in Guyana and the Caribbean. And because I think that is what's going to create the kind of political situation to have once and for all of the number of offending things that the United Nations had identified, and it is very current in Guyana, you know, to be corrected. I mean, I'm trying not to tie this thing yet to the PPP's quest for dominance and their clear contemptuousness and disrespect for Africans. I'm trying to treat this here, okay, like you call a slip of the tongue, that could be corrected quickly. So I would say we have to continue advocacy. And if on this matter, they don't act quickly, we have to tie to the overall political grievances that we have, and we have to press them in a way that is unprecedented, because we will be able to separate the two. But they can't say we didn't give them a chance to separate this from the general engagement. And I think that we have to keep pressing the advocacy for change with a clear understanding that if on this low-lying fruit they can correct themselves and speedily remove it from the books, then we will have to see it as a deliberate or policy that is tied to the domination agenda, and then we have to treat it as such.
Tacuma Ogunseye, there on the way forward, we shall see. We will continue to cover the issue here on Politics 101 tomorrow at 5 o'clock at Critchlow Labour College. There is a symposium, and then later on in the evening, we will continue our discussion on the issue here. Our guest tomorrow night, Kimani Nehusi, Professor of African Studies, Eric Phillips, Chief Eric Phillips, who is well known to us, and Attorney at Law Don Holder, Cush, and Dr. Vincent Adams. We'll see you all tomorrow night. Vincent, Tacuma, thank you all so much for coming through this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So, tomorrow evening, we continue. As usual, love is the watchword, and we ain't taking nothing less than the total removal of the use of that word from all official institutions in our country.